Sorry.
Oh, yeah, this is weird for me. I'd rather
look up that one. Okay.
It's kind of hard to see.
Yeah. I took it off mute.
Okay.
Everyone should be able to hear you.
All right. Well, we have a huge crowd here, which we're super excited about. This is Tony Srempa. He is an agent in KW Lake Minnetonka. Give us a little background on you, so anyone that doesn't know you that might be on Zoom or that's here kind of knows your background, when you started, and who you are.
Yeah. I started. I guess I would back up a little bit. Before I got licensed, I started in rental real estate. I acquired a property in 2001. And then I got rolling with that, got my feet wet in real estate on that. And all I really thought about for the next 5 years, from 2001 to 2006, was being in real estate somehow. I just didn't know how. I think I know how now. I'm getting
you kind of got it
there. And then I got licensed in 2006, very beginning of 06, and then got rolling and took me a little while to get it figured out. And then rolled through and ended up having, at one point in time, maybe our peak, probably had 6 or 7 licensees with 2 or 3 assistants. And then have since scaled back in total numbers. We do about the same sales and same volume we did back then, but now we just do it with 3 licensees. So there's myself, Shane, and then Molly, who is a licensed agent who does sales, and then is also team marketing and listing.
Rough numbers, units and volume that you do.
We kind of hover around 125 to 150 units a year. Volume ranges between 50 and 75 million, I think.
Okay.
Somewhere in that range. I don't know exactly where we're going to land this year, probably somewhere in the 70, 75 range, I think.
So we're talking about inventory, he just doesn't know. That's okay though, right? You're like somewhere around 75 million, around there.
Pretty close. I know what my numbers are. I know I'm going to land right just under 40 myself.
Perfect. All right. So you started in a time, tell us about that time, because 2006, there's some people that are on here that might have been licensed for a year, 2, 3 years, and that market's so different than when you first started. So part of the reason we chose to kind of have a conversation with you is market was really different when you got in, and you built quite the business in that time period in 2006. So tell us a little bit about that, and then we can talk about, what you kind of feel is going on with inventory and interest rates and price points right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of similarities actually now to 2006 in some ways.
Okay.
At least sort of what it feels like. But I think on the way up, like when you're building a business versus have one that's in more sustaining mode, I think it's easier to grow in a market like we're maybe sort of in now, and maybe what 2006 was. I think maintaining in a market like now, or growing in a market like now, is a little harder once you've already been established, in some ways. But I think for me in 06, like we didn't know any different. Like I didn't have any preconceived idea of mindset or what it should have felt like, or how it was to interact with people in a market that was declining. That was all I really knew. So from 2006 to 2011, I don't think I ever had a seller that made any money on a house. It was all declining, a lot of short sales. And then today, I don't think we're really going to run into that many short sales. I think there's been kind of some talk here and there that, oh yeah, maybe short sales will increase, but I think the only way we're going to really see any of those is on a reverse mortgage. And I did have one last year that was a short sale, but it was the first one I'd done since probably 2013 or 14. So it had been a long time.
That's a really interesting perspective. From 2006 to 2011, no one really made money on a house. I mean, that is so different than the last how many years, right? And that conversation was a lot different. And yet that's when you built what you built.
Yeah, they were depressing conversations, quite honestly. They weren't.
But it happened, like they happened, and people were still buying and selling.
Yeah.
And inventory looked different than it does now. However, I think the point of that is there's this doomsday of inventories down and interest rates went up, or inventory is getting to become more, and now we're sitting on the market. That was normal, right? Back in 2006 to 2011.
And I don't remember exactly what the total nationwide sales numbers were. Like, I don't know how many total units we're selling. I can't remember some of those stats. But if we're at 4 million today and we were in our peak, we were having 6 million sales nationwide, there's still a heck of a lot of opportunity. And I think the thing I really like about right now is that there's much less competition between agents. Like, I'm not in a lot of my listing appointments, I don't have agents competing. Like, it's not like what it was. I feel like there's a lot of the agents that are in that category that are doing, maybe 15 or 20 sales a year and less are really hurting bad because they didn't have a system set up that would help kind of carry through and have a lot more volume and make it work. But I don't know, it's an interesting time. But
so we talked a little bit about inventory before we got in here, just in regards to, I mean, we have obviously the graphs that are up on the screen, and those stopped just because these were the national ones from Mega Camp for this year starting in June. But what are you kind of seeing as we talked about inventory as the year has been progressing?
I think, well, just probably very similar to last year. I mean, I think we'll end up seeing more inventory this fall, but we're not quite at peak yet. We're still probably another month away maybe for the peak of total inventory on the market for the year. But it'll be interesting to see how that's impacted as we roll through. I mean, it feels like it's probably going to be fairly similar to what we saw. I don't think it'll be a dramatic difference from last year, but we are seeing, at least in the last 30 days, showing activity is slowing dramatically. Price reductions are increasing like crazy. It feels, we were talking about this before. It's like my memory of previous years and what the fall feels like compared to what it feels like when we're in it. It feels really impactful when we're in it. And I don't really remember. I mean, I know it was doing a similar thing last year and the year before, that seasonal cycle that we see, but it feels like right now it feels much more intense than I remember what it felt like last year. But that's my perception. It's not necessarily there.
Yeah. This was not really going to be an open forum. However, I think it's important for if you're on Zoom or if you're in here and you have questions, you're like, man, this is what I'm feeling. It would be kind of fun for you guys to interact too. Because obviously where Tony works is different than where all of you work, right? So he is primarily west, correct? And so I know that some things can be different, obviously hyper local, whether or not you're in the city, Edina, east or Elk River area. So if you have questions or you want a comment at some point, feel free to. I was kind of mentioning it's not a mastermind. However, we would like participation because I think it's great to have multiple perspectives on it. Is that fair?
Fair.
Awesome. All right. So when we were talking about original list price, we kind of went over this a little bit earlier. Tony and I did. You mentioned price reductions, price improvements. We have not seen that in, I don't know, prior to 2020, really. I mean, that didn't happen. So for any
It's
agents,
been this amazing climb since 2011.
yeah. So when we're looking at, here's the original list price kind of, and this is Twin Cities wide. So just because I don't know who's on or where people do their business, it's not like I honed in on a specific area. But when we're looking at that, we're at $395 for median original list price, right? If we go to median sales price, we're at $365, right? And this could be for various reasons. We can't take it as like a large, perspective, bird's eye perspective. This could be because luxury isn't selling as fast. It could be like multiple different reasons. However, you see the difference in the graph that it's not necessarily like declining, but actual median sales price is kind of flattening out. Are you feeling that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Well, and I think there's a lag to the last 30 days seems very different than what the previous year or multiple years has felt like.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it just seems like if I look at my email account the percentage of emails coming through with a listing available that has a price reduction. When realtors are starting to send emails with price reductions, then like, yeah, the market's definitely changing. It's different than what it was. You know, I mean, that's a very clear measure to me. And then you go pull up your hot sheet or the sheet that's on your main page in MLS, then you can really see what that percentage is of new listings and reductions. And
it's interesting that you say that, because I remember not getting an email at all from any agent for like 2.5 years. Like not even on a new listing.
everybody wanted
Like not even, I don't even think you could like create the listing email before it got sent out. And now you're right. I mean, I probably have 15 a day of new listing, new price. I mean, there's a shift, which also means there's a shift in how we're marketing and how we're talking to our clients and setting up expectations.
It's almost like a panic.
Okay.
You know, when they're sending out messages to realtors, it's like no buyers are responding. New leads aren't coming in. So we'll send them to the agents. Maybe they have leads, you know, or maybe they have active buyers. That's just my impression of what I think of when I'm seeing those emails come out. And, you know, and like instead on my listings, instead of jumping to say, hey, let's send it out to agents, I'm like, okay, well, what's happening within the market? What do I have to do with this seller? Or what do I have to do within my strategy to create the market? And
tell us a little more about that strategy, right? Because I think this is what's important when you're setting the expectation. We talked about book a showing. We talked about looking at how many showings are in that price range in that specific area, so that as this shifted on the showing portion, there were a lot of conversations, right, with sellers that were like, we've only had 2 showings. What's going on?
Yeah.
We see in the media that, you know, it's 12 showings, 15 offers. What's going on? How do you set that expectation when this shift in inventory and days on market's happening?
Yeah, there's a lot within this category. I think there's what was happening before was, let's say you had 20 showings on a new listing in the first 2 weeks. Out of those 20 showings, you know, a year ago, you may have had 7 or 8 or 10 offers, but today maybe you have a really similar number of showings, but you don't get an offer, or an offer limps in and it's below asking and seller pays, and it's got this and that kind of weird criteria that the seller doesn't want. So you've got to counter that, kind of work through, you know, okay, well, how can we make this work, you know, or not, or do we have to kind of keep going on to that next one? It's interesting. There's a lot of hesitation. And then with that recent rate hike, it was almost like buyers were already upset about pricing, and they're like, fine, I'm out, I'm good. We'll just wait. We'll wait till spring, or we'll wait till it gets more painful, and then we'll kind of jump back in and get going again.
Okay, let's get into that piece. I don't know if we needed to see some of these slides, but actually let's hit days on market. We were just talking about that, right? This is a pretty interesting visual, right? When you're talking to a seller or you're talking to a buyer, I mean, what do you see? What do you see from this visual? You guys can chat too.
I see a snapshot of a market that was crazy the past 3 or 4
Yeah.
years. If you put that out over the past 10 years or the past 15 years, we're going to see that the days on market used to be 60, 90, 100 days.
Normal. That was,
Normal.
I mean, I know I don't want to use the word, but that's what everyone's like, oh, this balanced normal,
Right.
this is what it was like. 90 days, that was almost like average. You were
Yes.
like, if I can get an offer within 90 days, I'm doing great,
Mhm.
right? And those conversations weren't weekly or daily. That was like, you checked in and it was the same conversation week after week after week after week.
Yeah, so for like month supply, at least what I saw this morning is that it's really been, at least in the area that I was looking, it's been increasing every single month since January of 2022.
Interesting.
What I've been seeing.
And that was a hyper local, like where were you looking for
It was
that?
a little bit, I think it was Hennepin County maybe.
Yep.
But yeah, January 2022, months of inventory every month increasing.
Well, it's like anything, right? It creeps up on you and until you notice all of a sudden now, right? Then you're like, oh,
From 2 weeks to 2 months worth of inventory, or 1 week or 3 days, of inventory to 2 months of inventory. I mean, if we think about that as a percentage increase in inventory, it's an incredible increase. And it just feels so different. But I remember, 2009, 2010, when we had a multi-million-dollar listing, I didn't happen quite as often back then. And I'd be like, I don't know if I want it. I think I'd rather sell 10 $300,000 houses because
I don't know if I want it.
No, I can sell those in a couple of days, no big deal, maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
And the
I can sell
conversations were
those.
hard
Yeah,
and stressful.
it was a lot of work. And then, but here, the reason why I bring it up is there were times where there was a listing that I had and I'm running the market. I'm like, there's 3 or 4 years or 6 years worth of inventory based on the amount that are selling and the amount available on the market. I'm like, oh my gosh, like how do you even price a property like that? Do you just say to the seller, yeah, now's just not the right time? No, you say, okay, well, since we have 3 years or since we have 5 years worth of inventory in your category, well, then we just say, okay, well, we just have to be the absolute number one all the time. If somebody else comes on new, we have to beat them. We have to beat them in this. There were phrases that were always coined was like a price war in a beauty contest. I heard that over and over and over again. And
What was a bridesmaid, never the bride? That was another
yeah,
one.
all these weird ones. But it was real. Like it was just a different time, but you really had to pay attention. You had to know what the current inventory was. And it almost didn't matter sometimes what the inventory was. Like you can look at your showing activity and look at your feedback. If you have no showings, it's really clear, we're a lot too high. If we're getting showings and we're second, third, fourth place multiple times, like we're closer to the mark, but we still know that we're quite high compared to what those expectations are.
So I think it's interesting what you just said, that inventory doesn't matter if you're actually tracking that listing, right? And you're figuring out what the competition is. You're figuring out what showings look like, and you're taking a wholesome look at the listing. It's not just, oh, this listing's a 3-bed, 2-bath, or 5-bed, 5,000 square feet. You're looking at it as a whole, right? Like where are we sitting, no matter what that inventory looks like? And that's been something that hasn't been looked at when things were just flying off the shelf, right? Mary Beth.
I found, I worked during 06, 07, 08, and when you were trying to explain to a seller, why it's not selling or whatever, but you have to do a lot of homework, and some of that homework is previewing listings, seeing what your neighbors look like. Yeah, they might be at this price. Why? Are they close to a busy street? Does it smell funny in the house, like smoke? You can't see that on pictures. So I would go look at all their competition and then watch if they sold or not. And then it would explain, well, okay, this guy was priced really well. Well, they were way less than me. I'm like, yeah, they sold. You didn't. So, let's look at what they had that maybe we don't have, and, compare, and then you get maybe a price reduction, hopefully.
I think the other point on that too is we were just in the ALC clinic last week, and we were talking about networking with agents. During this time, I think the networking of agents got really muddy, where it wasn't there necessarily, because things were going, right? An agent just came into the office the other day and said, man, I just had a phone call with the agent from such and such realty, and I was just asking him, what do your showings look like? We're all in this together, right? And that agent is sitting there as well, and he's like, I don't have any showings, right? And to be completely honest, we remember when people are like, no, we're so busy, there's 100 showings, and there might have been or there might not have been, but now we're going to need each other no matter where you're at. It's, what are you doing? Did you get 3 showings? What was your feedback? And vice versa, where that's going to be huge in a market like this. And don't burn the bridges, no matter where someone's license lies. I mean, this is going to be an important part. And I think it was back then too, of just networking and figuring what's going on.
Well, and filtering through the kind of our barrage of showings and filtering through like the offers that we were getting. And then it becoming like, where did it become so common that a listing agent, you can't find their phone number or you can't get them on the phone? and I can only text with them, like, where did the humanness of our industry go in the last 3 years? Because my experience has been, we've lost a lot of touch with that. You know, when we got busy, we got maybe a little cocky in some ways, where like, oh, well, you know, we just wait. We don't need to really respond to them because someone else will just show up, or they'll make an offer and we'll get the deal done, and we don't have to talk to anybody. Well, I think there's a lot of beauty in this industry with having conversations with people. Like, this is a very human business. This is a very emotional process. So for so many people, if we can keep that humanness in there, I think there's a lot to be had, a lot to be learned between us, and then also just with communicating with our clients too.
Absolutely.
Side note, but
I know, I think that,
Can I add on to that?
yeah,
It's kind of part of sharpening our knives, right? So our market has been moving so fast in the last few years that we've been purely transactional. We've been taking the business and running with it and moving so fast that we're not slowing down to sharpen our knives and nurture our relationships. And now that we're moving into a more, I wouldn't say necessarily balanced, but at least a little easier paced market, we are in a service market where we need to make sure that we are setting healthy expectations up with our clients when we're looking at the market data, and having our clients understand that, yeah, I know your neighbor up the street sold their house in 3 hours with 20 offers and it was raining money on them a year ago. It doesn't look that way now. So being able to interpret this data and set those expectations up with our clients, and nurturing those relationships with other real estate professionals that we can lean on when things get a little wonky. I think that's a message that a lot of our agents that have only experienced the fast market they're not hearing that yet. Does that make sense?
well, I think that's a great point too, because if you're not in real relationship with your clients or even that other agent, those tough conversations,
Are incredibly tough.
they're just not going to happen, and you're
yeah,
going to
you
get
may
fired.
not even have
You know what I mean? Where that's doing your client a disservice, your life is going to feel very stressful and panicked, right? Because going into a conversation to tell someone, hey, guess what? You know, this price reduction means that what we did in our net sheet is going to really squeeze that, and there might not be a whole lot, or there were conversations you had to bring money to the table
Yeah.
to get this thing closed.
Yeah.
And at that point, you better know your value as an agent, because they're like, huh, okay, so I'm bringing money to the table and you're making 15 grand, right? So, and those are real. Those are very real conversations of yes, and I'm getting you through this time period, because the motivation is we have to move because we're in a very unfortunate situation. You lost a job or whatever it is, you wanted extra space. This is the decision that you guys have made, right? So those are going to be, you have to be in relationships.
Well, and not only setting healthy expectations, but also doing the front work to really make that listing shine, like you were
Yep.
saying before. I'm not going to take your listing and throw it in the swamp with the other listing.
Yep.
I'm going to shine it up and make it look the best way it's possible, so we don't have to worry about the other homes on the market. We're only going to work on our chip and our chair. That's all we need to play the game right now. We're going to shine you up and make you look amazing, and that's why we need to keep sharpening our tools. That was the other point I was trying to get onto.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're new, I know no one in this room is new, but if you're new and you're online, get in conversation with someone that you know that's been in the business for at least 5 to 6 years, or more than that, right? Really get into conversation with them and ask them, what would you suggest us doing right now? And what did you do in the time when inventory was like this and days on market are, higher than 3 weeks? What were the resources that you used? I have talked to a lot of veteran agents that don't know how to use book of showing reports, right? They're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And that's okay, but let's get you in the know on how to use that, utilize it, and inform your clients, because our job is to inform people of what is going on in the market. It's not to tell them what to do, right? On that note,
And I had to sit at the table with a seller that was bringing money to the transaction. They were, if they went to buy something, they realized that, yeah, I'm not gonna make the money that I want on this, but I'm gonna save the money on the purchase. So things change.
Yeah.
And you gotta know what's changing.
it goes back to motivation. right? There were people that were just selling to sell because they're like, ooh, I might make some cash, right? And then they were like, oh, but they're just kind of sitting over here and they don't really want to move. Well, are they motivated to move or to buy? If they're not, keep them here and move on and find someone else that is motivated.
And I think that starts on that point, like when we're in a declining market, and I'm gonna be hesitant to say I don't know exactly what we're in right now, because I think there's some other factors that are at play, like we're talking about an economic shift. We're talking about, we have different fiscal policy than we've ever had. I think there's, like, when we say, talk to an agent who's been in this before, I think to really sit down and look at all the factors that are at play, we've never seen anything like this. We've never seen a debt ceiling like that we have right now at 33 trillion that continues to grow, and understanding the impact of that economically. Like, even if the market declines, it may not actually decline in dollars the way we think it's going to be. Like maybe the decline is pricing staying the same for the next 2 or 3 years, which is actually a really significant decline because of how much money is going to be printed to be able to pay our debt, be able to pay our military spending. So those other factors that are at play, I think, are really, really huge. And I think when I think about just trying to interpret what I'm seeing now and what I'm hearing from all these different sources, I don't necessarily really think we're going to have a dramatic shift in pricing coming down. We will have an adjustment, but I don't think it's going to be anything we've ever seen before. But getting back to motivation with a seller and trying to figure out do I want to take this listing? Does this listing make sense? In the previous 3 years, you take every listing you possibly can because they're all really going to sell. But when we get into a market that is changing, we could spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort on someone who's really not actually going to move. And you hear it in their language, but you also have to interpret it in what their behavior is. And I think us getting really, really good at, trying to picture, how are those pieces really going to fall when the situation plays out, and we have to make a 10% reduction in price in order to get the offer. Like, let's try and figure that out today before we go on. Like, if they want $1.1 million for the property, and I think it might take 900 or 950 or 975 as a list price to get it sold, I might test it out right now and see if they'll do 9. What would it look like if you took 900 for your house? Oh, I probably wouldn't sell. Well, I guess what would the other factors be? What would be the impact if you didn't move? And then, just playing through all the different pieces. There's so many different pieces to someone's decision, whether they move or not. So I think getting really good at peeling back all those layers and diving into it, I think the more you know ahead of time, the better it could be. But
So when you were talking about the economic portion of it, okay, they're back. Am I able to switch that?
Sorry, Katie.
No, that's okay. It could be user error too.
I was looking at the chat.
It could be me.
Someone put something in the chat.
Oh, gotcha. So we've talked earlier in this discussion, you said something about, the buyers aren't reacting, or they're just like, I'm out of the market now. And when you think about affordability, and then we can go through some of the other sides of interest rates, you and I have had some pretty interesting discussions on what you've noticed in different sections of listings, right? Whether or not it's luxury listings and what portion of their actual worth or their money, right? And affordability goes towards that house, and why that particular area hasn't gotten hit as much. Whereas when we're looking at the really low interest rates that we had, it was a large amount of someone's income going to that. And then that shifts a lot when interest rate goes up. So let's talk a little bit about that and kind of what your perspective is in regards to where the interest rates and affordability are going.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's such a big topic that it's hard to nail it down. So I'll try and give you the framework ahead of time.
Yeah.
And then we'll try and dive into it. So on the one hand, let's say we've got a first-time home buyer. We've got that category of a more entry-level home. Let's just say it's 500 and below. they may be spending 30 to 40 or 30 to 40+% of their income to be able to afford that home. And really on paper, it says they can afford it, but with all these other factors at play, they really probably can't if they're going to go up to 40+% with food and every fuel and all the things that are so much more than they were. So there's that category. They're spending a giant portion, an unhealthy portion of their income to buy a home. But that's part of that. It's part of that variable when you get into home ownership that kind of have to take it on. You have to take some risk. But it's really uncomfortable. And that average age of a first-time home buyer, it's quickly approaching 40 years old. I mean, what are we at, 36 or 37 years old or something right now? Can't remember exactly what
Like
that
my
is, but
actual age or the first time home buyer? No, just kidding.
anyway, so then
So
there's
it's like, whatever.
so then there's the opposite, and I'm trying to keep my train of thought, and I have a hard enough time already as it is. So on the other side, if you've got a client that they're into their 5th or 6th ownership of a house, and they own 2 or 3 other homes, and they have a substantial net worth, and they've sold the business, and they have all these other things, so they have this substantial net worth and income. You may run into a category of buyer that's 2, 3, 4, 5 million plus, where they're spending a tiny little percentage of what their earned income is annually. So it's sort of a tale of 2 totally different worlds that I'm seeing. It's like the first time home buyer struggles to just get into a house, and then this more luxury price point or this upper level price point, they're doing what they want when they want, and they're just trying to evaluate, do I want to spend this much to, like, and then you get into the category of talking about building and how much things cost, and like everyone has their point where they kind of pull back and shut things down for a little while and regroup. So it's an interesting discussion, and there's so many different pieces to all this, because if this higher level price point, if the stock market stays where it is and increases, that percentage of the population, or that segment of the population, those empty nesters and the people who have substantial wealth already, they continue to buy, sell, move, go on vacation, go out to eat, do all the things of normal life as always. But if the stock market decreases and comes down from where we're at, we're going to see that whole shift happen. They'll stop doing what their activities are. Their behavior will change. And that's a big part of what's keeping a lot of this economy going. It's that part of the population. And it's a big segment. And then if we look at the other side, it's really interesting. There's so many things that an earlier homeowner, someone who hasn't established a real solid net worth yet and real solid income, the decisions that they have to make to be able to get into homeownership, stay in homeownership, and figure out what they do it's a totally different set of parameters.
Well, we talked about that. It's when you say it's kind of 2 tails. One set of the population wants to see the stock market go down so that they can get in, right?
Yeah.
And then the other one who's already in doesn't want to see it go down because that's their money going down. And so have we ever thought about all of this when you're thinking of the real estate market and home ownership and what really entails like first time home buyers versus luxury buyers? Have we all thought about that? Because I think it's a really cool perspective of the things that people do think about, you know what I mean? And how that all plays into where are you going to live, right? Even when we're looking at this, as you're talking about first time home buyers and you're thinking about, I'm thinking about the luxury apartments. Majority of luxury apartments right now have a place for pets, right? And we're watching that raise. Why? Because that population usually has a pet of some sort. So there's that's raising, that expense is more for them. Now interest rate is rising. It's like everything in their life is getting more and more expensive. And then we talk about affordability of the house, right? Where what can you actually afford right now with a monthly payment? And we're sitting at that percentage of income just going out the window and not a lot of savings coming in because of that.
Yeah. Well, and I don't remember if I'm going to restate this stat. It's more just the general idea. I'll probably mess up the numbers, but I remember hearing something where there's family of 4. They kind of evaluated the food cost and the fuel cost, some of these other things. And they said that a family of 4 in 2021, what they're spending annually has increased by $15,000 just in food, which is, and I don't know if I have the whole stat accurate. It's more just the idea that it is dramatically
Oh,
different.
I can believe that. Like
Absolutely dramatically different.
you, I ate a lot of chicken. It's weird, maybe an overshare, but you go and buy chicken versus like a beef or a ground turkey. It's like, whoa, that's a bill. Like there's like when you actually buy non-processed food at the grocery store, it's expensive no matter where you go to buy it. You're like, really, Kami? Talk
No,
about
I'm
chicken.
not, no, I'm right there, right there.
Okay, so let's talk about the luxury market because I think in other markets, like years prior, we always watch where that's going first. To your point of if that's where they have, we watch that stock market goes down and that's kind of what shifts things. What are you seeing in that right now in regards to inventory days on market? Is that slowing down? Because isn't that normally the first indicator of like what's happening with the market?
Yeah, no, I think there is a shift that's happening there. I think it's quieter. It's a little slower. Days on market are increasing. We're seeing more adjustments in pricing. But there's still very limited inventory. Like I had a couple of off market listings. One was the owner wanted to ask 3.6 and I think I convinced him to ask 3.3, and we ultimately ended up selling it just a little under 3.2. But we had an offer 3 months earlier for 3 million, and I think they came up to 3.15. And so we're going through this process, and now we have it sold to the second buyer. First buyer didn't come together, and the first buyer actually reached out to me a week or two ago and said, it was an interesting perspective because she's like, hey, if that house falls through, I think I let the wrong one go. She's like, I think I needed to get that one because there's really nothing else on the market in that price point. And what's really interesting is 2 or 3 years earlier, I look at what you could build for $2 million or what you could build for $3 million.
Yeah.
Hey, you got to add another million to it to get what you could then. And it's my perspective. Like I'm trying to catch up. I'm trying to compute like how much it really costs to build a home and what you can get for the money, what your income needs to be to make it work. It is so tough to adjust from 2 or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, what pricing was and what it is today. And so maybe that does come down a little bit more. I think the hardest part for that building category is the labor. The labor is absolutely through the roof. Like I think if we talk with a lot of our business owner clients, when we spend time in different service industries, some restaurants, like one of my favorite restaurants, they really struggle with staff and great food. They have a great plan, but they struggle so much with staffing. It's like every time I go in there, and I usually go in there at least once a week, and there's always different staff. Like there's just such a challenge for staffing and for employing great people. There's so many shifts, there's so many things that are happening in the world right now. It's kind of hard to keep track and make sense of all of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly where I was headed with that, but it's just such a.
Well, I think it goes back to affordability, right? Because not only
comes together. Yeah.
not only is it the two areas, to your point, even in being able to have service industry employees, right? I mean, we've all seen restaurants go under because they can't keep employees, which affects everybody. It affects the business owner. It affects that particular area where it was, right? Whether or not like that neighborhood, and it affects the jobs that were available, not just the servers, it's dishwashers, it's cooks, it's everything. So there are a lot of moving parts, and I think we simplify it into inventory and interest rates. And it's like this perfect storm of things. And if you can't understand all of it, you might be misleading people, and you don't have to understand it in depth. And I think I was talking to someone, maybe it was you and I, if you never took like an economics class, go online and take an economics class right now, like just to learn some of the things at a very generalized level of what's going on, right? Whether or not because other people don't know that either, right? So when you're talking about the things that we're talking about right now, there might be people that are like, I would not be able to speak to my client like this, right? Which is fair and let's get the education on that piece so that you can, like, what does that look like? What does the effects of, the items on the screen right now increasing? What is inflation? How does that affect you buying a home? Because they're very, elementary economic topics, but if you've never explored that, it's really tough to have that conversation. And then we go back to, well, it's the inventory. Oh, it's pricing. Oh, the interest rates are high, and someone's getting misinformed.
Does the luxury market rise and fall with the interest rates though? Or does the luxury market, those buyers a lot of cash?
So I have, if I track over the last 12 homes that I've sold that are $1.5 million plus, in the last, I don't know the exact time frame, maybe 12 months or 15 months, 16 months. I would say 95% are cash.
Okay.
So, I mean, to that point, right? If it is cash and then interest rates are doing whatever they're doing, it's affecting the other markets or the other buyers, right? And then stock market goes down. That means that's why, because it is
Right.
cash, and their cash that they have invested is changing. And those are things just to be aware of. And I think a lot of people say, well, that doesn't matter to me because I don't sell there or I'm not going to be buying there. It absolutely matters. And so does the other end of the spectrum. Both sides matter. It doesn't matter where your average sales price is or who your target market of client is. You have to understand all sides of the market,
Well, it's a whole ecosystem. It's like if we get rid of all the mosquitoes, then we don't have the bats, and then we don't have all the other bugs and everything that goes up the food chain. Like if we don't have the first time home buyers that are buying and selling and those homes turning over, we don't have the move up people. We don't have the move up people. We don't have the luxury people. So it's, and some are shifting over to renting too. And that's another piece I think to talk about too, is that, that was part of what got me into the industry. It was owning and operating rental property. And that part of the market, there are some segments of it that are very active that don't really tend to change that much. And I'd say that's like, I'm experiencing 2,000 in rent and below, like that's still real active. They're always moving though. They're moving every year. They're finding a new place and there's activity, but then you get into that 3,000 to 4,000 a month category for single family home rentals, and it's quieter. But it's really interesting, what's happening out there. Like I've sat there for a few weeks here and there where I'm like, oh, nice. Hopefully get a lead today. Hopefully someone's wanting to move and wanting to rent. And I'm like, well, I can't reduce the price from 4,000 to 3,500 to go get a tenant tomorrow. It's almost like there's just such a balance between making that drop and then having that now be kind of that new price point. And some of it is time of year. It's interesting how few people there are, but there's still all those natural factors that are happening. There's and we do quite a bit of insurance work too, where we have tenants displaced from insurance related items. So fire, flood, those are always happening. And those are really good. And when we respond quickly to those, we find and capture those leads. But
well, to your point of rentals as well, when you start reducing the rent or rents start going down, or, does selling that make sense, right? With interest rates going up. And then that's where that shifts the investor mindset of, am I going to buy a rental property because am I going to be able to cash flow? Is that going to make, you know what I mean? So it does every single piece. Like I think about rentals in Minneapolis right now. I have a rental in Minneapolis. If I would sell that particular property at the price that it is, it's a tighter cash flow than when I purchased it, right? With what the interest rate is.
Most of them are break even or negative cash flow with rates where they're at. If you're
Correct.
acquiring a new
Yep.
property at 20% down,
Yep.
the numbers just simply don't work. So there's a lot of categories of investor buyers that are absolutely non-existent. I think
Which I think affects all markets, right? In some ways of, okay, either someone's going to hold this, or if they mismanage that or something happens to them, that goes to foreclosure or short sale or whatever it is, and that can affect the market as a whole.
There are a lot of new investors that are in the market right now that are looking for rental property. Like this has been such a hot topic for so long. And many of those people have been saving cash, and they're like, I'm specifically talking to that there's a segment of the population that's a very conservative, nervous new investor that has a ton of cash, and they want to go in and they'll put 50% down, or they'll pay cash for this rental. And from a return perspective, I'm like, what are you doing? This makes absolutely zero sense. This is not a wealth building strategy, right? But what it is though is if we continue to print money like crazy, like we're going to have to pay the debt, and pay the military spending, and pay all the things that our country has, that asset price will continue to go up over time regardless. So from that perspective, it's a pretty safe hedge to have the money parked there. But your more experienced investors buying homes in a different way. They're taking the risk of, and it's a very small risk. We didn't talk about this, by the way.
No, we didn't, but
Of acquiring property by using the current loan that's in place. I'm gonna stay away from saying the word assuming, because it's not assuming, it's just using it. It's keeping it in place, doing a contract for deed purchase. And I know a lot of people have been talking about this, and they're talking about it as, I don't even know what the word is that they're using. It's like
Are you talking about like a sub two?
what is this sub twos?
It's
Contract for
rated
deed,
sub two,
where you
exactly
keep
what you're saying.
where you keep the existing loan in place. And a lot of these very conservative buyers that could take advantage of an incredible opportunity, they're so nervous about the whole idea, like, wait a minute, what if the bank calls it due? I almost guarantee you that bank won't call it due as long as that loan continues to be paid. I think there's some basic principles to follow to be able to do it correctly, to reduce that risk of it. But even if they do call it due, they're going to send a letter, and the letter will be, hey, we noticed that you sold the property, the loan is now due. Well, if you ignore the letter and you probably just keep paying the payment, probably not going to foreclose, because it's very expensive to foreclose on a loan. It doesn't make
These are probably,
it doesn't make sense.
since it's recorded, these are probably.
Well, that's why I was prefacing. I don't know if this is gonna be okay to say or not, but I think there are people that are buying this way all over the country. It's happening very consistently, and
Contract for deed, it happened quite often. I mean, in other markets, right? When I first got in the market, it was happening rather regularly, actually. And people were nervous about it then. That's a whole nother point of, you just have to educate yourself as an agent. Like, if someone came up to you and said, what's a sub two, you'd be like, what? Right? But if they know, we should know. And we should know at least a little bit about it to be able to say, I'm not your person for that, but Chad is, right? Or whatever it might be. We need to be aware what the options are for people to keep kind of the markets moving along.
And you can have a beautifully cash flowing property with roughly 20-30% down, whatever that difference is between the current loan and the current value. You can have a beautifully cash flowing property and keep that loan in place, versus, like, we have a buyer that had made an offer on a property we have listed, where they're like, no, we want to do our own financing, and we're going to put 50% down, and then we're going to take this, interest rate that we're going to get over here. And I'm like, it just, like, when I look at it on paper, I'm like, if you have access to a significant amount of cash, why not acquire the property, do it, keep that loan in place. And then if something happens that's not favorable, and the bank says, hey, we'd like you to pay off that loan because you sold the property.
You still have that cash.
Then pay it off then. You have the cash over here on the sideline to do that, and that's your safety. But I've had a couple of people that are just so hesitant to move forward with it. It's just it's a new conversation. It's a new thing that I don't think everyone is comfortable with or educated with, and it's not right for everybody. It's not always right for the seller. Sometimes that seller has to get rid of that loan off their credit to go buy their next place, but there's going to be plenty of opportunity where they won't need to.
I think another thing that when we're talking about prospective buyers, is to further educate them that there's a certain percentage of homeowners, and somehow I have this note that almost 80% of homeowners have an interest rate of 5% or below. Not only that, but of 30% of that number, there's only 50% of their mortgage left. So their equity is huge over the past 5 years. And that's why we're also seeing less inventory.
Well, and when you think about that, I mean, those numbers and having 50% equity, even if, right, things shift, that would have to be a huge shift to get back to you're not getting anything,
Right.
right, when we're selling your house. So that conversation would be very different. It's just, it would be a totally different conversation than some of the foreclosure and like short sale
Well,
conversations.
and that's the conversation that I'm having with first-time home buyers that, well, what about the bubble? We're in a bubble. Like, are we in a bubble? Here's the stats,
Yeah,
which are way different than they were in 2006
Yeah.
with the amount of equity people have in their homes.
I think the bubble's hidden, and I think it's demand. I think it's pent up demand that is happening right underneath our feet. And rates adjust a little bit, and I think it's just gonna take off again. That's my gut feeling.
well, and
It's
even
not
those,
based on a
even
whole
that
lot.
hidden buyer, right? It's just because they don't understand, which they shouldn't unless we tell them, right?
Right.
Because if you look at any source, media and social media and what people are saying, it's such scare tactics, right? Of, oh man, the interest, like, what does that mean?
Right.
And honestly, it could be a really great conversation of what does that mean to you? And I think it's interesting what people would respond with. Because I
Yeah.
don't think they're really sure what it
You know
means.
something I've not seen lately, or maybe I just haven't heard about it, are first-time home buyer seminars. We used to do a bunch of those.
Yeah,
I've not heard one agent do one of those in the past 6 months.
yeah. It would be a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Great opportunity. We've got about 7 minutes. Do we have questions, comments? You were gonna raise your hand.
Just one quick thing, like a lot of our first time buyers that bought in the last, say, 3 to 5 years that got a low rate or have a lot of equity. I mean, the conversation we're having with them is hold that property, rent it, and go buy. So which is what a lot of them are doing now because they have such great rates.
Yeah.
It's actually cash flowing for the most part. And just appreciating is that they're adding themselves to the market in the 500 to $1 million mark, but they're not bringing their $500,000 or less property to the market. So
Yep.
kind of adding to that pent up demand or low inventory essentially, but with pent up demand. So these first time home buyers are having a harder time because they're simply not adding anything to the market.
And upside to that is your client's building wealth, right? So it's like, there's a word, like, there's always something, and how does it play out?
And then there we have it, talking about the division of classes. It is happening right there. The percentage of home ownership in this country is decreasing dramatically because of that very point. There's more rentals hitting the market. There's more people hanging on to the properties they have. We have more people that own multiple properties than ever have before. And then we have this division that continues.
And then you add new construction. Is that gonna be happening? And is it gonna be affordable new construction? And I mean, because we hear that, and that could be a topic for the next class, is affordable new construction. I don't know if those two things actually exist
Or
together.
affordable,
You know what I mean?
quality.
Like, what, maybe the quality piece is the part that is.
Well, that's what
not adding
builders
up.
are doing. Builders, even very reputable builders, are putting some really rough quality materials.
Which in the long run, it's more expensive because you have to replace it anyways because it all falls apart, which is
Yep.
super sad.
And again,
Specific.
Yeah, if you're a family that needs the
Yep.
space though,
Yep.
like you're forced to do that. Forced to buy that house that has those inferior materials, but.
Do we have any questions on Zoom at all?
Someone brought up, made a comment about new construction. That says one thing to take into consideration is that in many markets, new construction is competition for previously owned listings. In the northwest suburbs, 6% of active listings are new.
Yeah.
And so on top of that, I was looking at new construction this morning too. We are at the highest point of new construction homes for sale in 3 years. The highest number of new construction homes for sale in 3 years.
And I'd be curious, because I don't know this off the top of my head, what is the average sale price of those, right? Like, what does that look like? Are we sitting at 500? Are we sitting at 350? Are we sitting at 2.5, right? Like, what does that look like? Because the word new construction looks so different depending on price point and where it's located, right? Anything else from that? Did you guys find this helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Honestly, if you haven't ever taken him out to coffee or whatever your drink of choice is, conversations are always great with him, just in regards to what the market's doing in economics. So we appreciate your time and always fun to hear your perspective.
My pleasure. Thanks. Hopefully it was good. Well received.
Yes, thank you.
Reminded me of, like, when we talk about communities,